Greetings, folks. So we're gonna get this started. So over to Jeff to give us the summary of the episode.
Okay, so this is Man and Machine, episode 5, which is titled Torch Song, written by Robert De Laurentiis and Dick Wolf, and directed by James Contner. And it originally aired June 9th, 1992, which you may notice is a bit of a gap from the last episode because they put the show on hiatus and brought it back on Tuesday nights before Law and Order to try to increase the viewing audience. But anyway, the brief summary on IMDb says Eve's capacity for emotion expands when she makes friends with a singer fearful of a music executive suspected of killing her sister. And that singer's name is Louise. And she is kind of interesting because it's sort of like sort of a retro club type of thing in terms of she sings old songs and in even an older style. So she sings mostly songs from like the 50s and 60s, but she sings them, even almost like 40s style, and wears the outfits.
Yeah, I'll just interpolate that. That's the kind of thing that you get when you think if they set it hundreds of years in future and they have the things slightly wrong in terms of the timeline.
Yeah, I kind of like that.
But this is supposed to just be like 20 or 30 years in the future. Yeah. It's supposed to be now.
Well, and it may not necessarily be wrong in terms of she may do that on purpose, or whoever runs the club may just want to do it that way. And they're sort of blending the styles of old time stuff.
I'll just interpolate that. I think she's a bit of a hipster in the ENFP, but back to you.
Anyway, so there's sort of two running plots, but they're weaved together as usual. And this Louise is, I'll call her eccentric, and so Eve obviously is somebody that pretty much takes whatever she's given at face value to begin with. So her eccentricities don't make Eve any more or less suspicious than she is of anybody. She pretty much treats everybody the same, whereas Man, on the other hand, is suspicious of her behavior for both sort of evident reasons of the way she presents herself, but also her history and the fact that she, has had mental illness treatment and that sort of thing. So, and then, of course, the factual discovery he makes at the Black Roses that she claims were sent to her by this music executive guy, that she actually sent them to herself to try to keep the police interested in the case. Meanwhile, the captain wants Bobby to take a vacation, so he eventually decides to go fishing with this fellow detective who's like at least partially Native American guy. So he has access to so-called tribal lands of fishing that other people don't. I think a lot of the recurring theme in the show is that there's been some, even though we don't really see it, there's not like a lot of smog going on most of the time, but there's sort of these implications that environmental degradation has caused some natural things to not be accessible anymore. Which is sort of a contrast, I could say, because every time they show outside scenes, everything looks like normal. Yeah. So there's not this huge evidence of that in practice, but they talk about things as if they are.
I remember, Jeff, that in the 80s and early 90s, wasn't there a lot of smog in LA and California?
Yeah. So there, it's a little bit of a disconnect there because they talk about things and you'd expect them to go out into some sort of wasteland-looking place, and it really isn't. So, but anyway, they imply that there's no fish except in places that have been protected. So anyway, that's going on. Meanwhile, Eve is sort of, for the first time, really making friends with somebody outside of the police department. And so she's, to the extent that she can, showing caring for this person beyond just trying to solve her case. Although obviously it helps her, the fact that there is sort of a police matter involved in it. So it makes her more interested than if it was just some random woman. And they don't really explore a whole lot outside of that. But this scene that is going by now, which I figure Ben would probably use for the thumbnail. Something from this. They're trying on different outfits. This is like really the only major thing that they do is like they have this and they have, they sing in the car together. So they sort of imply that they're trying to like, do some things that aren't specifically related to trying to track down the guy that's may or may not be trying to kill her. Anyway, of course, the climax results where where Louise steals Eve's gun because she's put it in her glove compartment, and she takes off in the car and goes to try to either shoot or at least scare the Curvers guy, and he overpowers her not too difficultly, and takes the gun. So then he's holding her with the gun, but of course he doesn't realize that Eve's essentially bulletproof, at least at least in most places. So when he shoots her and she goes over the side, he thinks he's taking care of her, but she comes back, and then we get a scene that's a little closer to the typical cop show, and or even a better one like Homicide, because it reminded me a little bit of the scene where Lewis is apprehending Luther Mahoney, but he decides to beat him up first, and that ultimately actually is what forces them into the situation where Kellerman shoots him, because he gets Lewis's gun away from him. If he hadn't stopped to beat him up, if he had just taken him in, then that, of course, wouldn't have happened. But Eve gets her moment like that in this because she decides to wail on him some when she didn't really have to do that. But, yeah. And then the final scene they have where Bobby and Eve in the car, and Eve gets Bobby to reluctantly sing along to the song that they're singing "My Boyfriend's Back." So anyway, that's the gist of it. So Ben, what'd you think?
Wow, there's a lot going on there, and the plot was a little bit different. This one, it was like a little bit, because it was a lot slighter than previous ones.
When you say slighter, do you mean like less information or
just less plot? There was just less plot, because it's mainly focused on Eve, and which is as I said before, to me, the stories are not interesting in themselves, but it's the effect of the story on Eve that I find interesting. So if you switched her out and just put a normal detective in, then I probably wouldn't have watched the series, or at least I would have enjoyed it a lot less. Part of it's unfortunate that I'm watching the series in such low quality in terms of the resolution. Because I just like it a little bit sharper. But going through I have a question for you, Jeff. Did your ENFP detector go off with Laura?
Hey, not specifically. What, Louise? You're talking about?
Louise. Sorry, yeah. Laura's the character I'm working on.
With Louise. No, not specifically, but I enjoyed her. I thought what I was going to say in terms of what made it more interesting to me was that one of the guest characters was more interesting, because some of the guest characters we've had have been kind of boring. I think the last episode we saw before,
I liked him.
Had a more interesting character. So I think when we get people that are a little bit more nuanced, and they're not just, oh, this is the villain or this is the damsel in distress, when we have people that are have a little more to them, then they're more interesting. And so this character, in the scenes that she had, she's believable in the sense that at the beginning you're thinking, well, it probably is going to end up being that she's right and this dude is the guy that really did kill her sister, but there's just enough of doubt because of the way that she comes across as not being entirely all there.
Yeah.
That, and the fact that Bobby was right about her sending herself the flowers, and it's, there's there's things that, again, I feel like in some cases, some shows would have not made it that nuanced. It would have been like somehow there's an explanation for everything she says and she's right about everything. And instead they turn, obviously she's still somebody who's going to send flowers to herself, who's going to trick a cop into giving her a gun, things like that. So she's not this entirely sympathetic character, but she is a sympathetic character, but she's portrayed as being believable as somebody who is not quite thinking rationally most of the time. And so it is like an eccentric performer and is, more focused on that. So I think she could be an SFP also. I don't think she necessarily would have to be. Right. Again, with a lot of shows like this, they don't really have time, or at least they don't spend time really exploring a whole lot about the philosophies of the characters. So it's sometimes hard to tell on the SN thing, and she doesn't really ask a bunch of what if questions. She talks mostly about physical things and trying on outfits and stuff like that is what she finds fun, things like that. So again, maybe
the actress was sort of like, without knowing the labels, sort of played her ENFP-ish. Now this is one of the things I liked. This reminds me of, have you ever seen Crocodile Dundee?
Yeah.
Right, and so you got that good joke. I loved it when I saw it as a kid. Of you got the Aborigine, and you got the woman who's about to take the photograph. And it says, "You can't take my photo." And she says, "Oh, do you think it will like steal your soul?" And he says, "No, you've got the lens cap on." Mm-hmm. And so that idea of the sort of the native person that has technological knowledge, and then you've got the guy here with, and I like the name, the Nailum Scalum Fish Finder.
Yeah.
I like that. The Nailum and all this other sort of like stuff. So sort of like playing against expectations, and almost like his like just for that character, the Native American, they added some like little details of like he said something like myths don't get the fish on the line, something like that. And then there was a bit at the end where all the cars were really retro as well, because they would have had production problems trying to make them all super advanced and custom made.
And that's another one of those things where they may have once again sort of predicted the future, because there was some of that in car models, especially in the last 10 years, because when you had that kind of economic downturn at the end of the last decade where several car companies and lines went out of business or had to downsize, you did see some more retro looking models of things, as opposed to trying to look like the latest space age stuff,
Yeah. And
after the opposite being the case for several years, and people, things like Hummers being popular, where people had these giant vehicles that they didn't need for any particular reason because they just wanted to look like that. So.
Oh yeah, and some things that dated it, where you've got the blower box, the coal box, and you've got the car blower, the car phone there. There's not that many people got carrying around a mobile phone.
Yeah.
Even that.
Well, that's something, again, they couldn't have entirely predicted. But it's interesting, that they've had previous things where they have had the video calls, but they just didn't have the mobile aspect of it as much.
This is the episode, I think, where Eve has smiled the most. There was an interesting phrase here. Now, a younger audience wouldn't get it, but it's just a little bit of a test for you, Jeff. So when he says, quoting Chairman Louise, what do you think that references?
I don't know.
That actually references quoting Chairman Mao. because in China, that everyone was sort of forced to carry around a little red book of quotes of Chairman Mao. And actually, I think it got to the point where they said that that book was like the second most published book after the Bible. The Chairman Mao Little Red Book. And then what else have I got on my list? Oh, yeah, I thought this was a very INTP line. Your tone indicates an antithesis is about to follow. So that was where that was the scene where Bobby says to Eve, "It's good that you have friends." And then at the beginning with the baseball, Eve is like completely uncompetitive about this. She doesn't care whether she wins or loses. For her, it's just the taking part. And I've just sort of written here that that's consistent with INTP, or at least in the physical arena. I mean, I imagine that if it's like anything sort of intellectual, then the INTP would be a bit more competitive, but they're not going to sort of like, probably wouldn't blow up about it.
And there was a brief reference to, again, something where they maybe not necessarily predicted the future exactly, but made reference to something that's a hot topic these days when he says the thing about they were playing against women, and he says, "I'm not sure they were all women. They need to do a hormone test."
Yeah, I made a comment about that on the board, and I thought, oh, I might not go there, given the way YouTube is.
Well, I wasn't going to go into any more detail than that. Just to say, I don't think mentioning that reference will cause problems. I just thought it was interesting that if anything, that would be more talked about than it was. It was kind of subtle at that time, because they couldn't have predicted exactly what cultural changes would be happening by this time.
Oh yes. Well, we won't elaborate on that. So, what have we got here? I think that's most of the things done on my. So, what did you think of Yancey Butler's performance in this one?
Well, I thought it continued to be good because she was able to sort of balance, sort of having awakenings or learning more about like human behavior, but still seeming awkward enough that it's not like she just flips a switch and becomes like, she acts completely natural. And there's still sort of, it's still stilted in some ways. So, kind of like Brent Spiner playing Beta, there's those times where he got to sort of cut loose from the usual android behavior, but it was always still probably some of the more difficult things because he had to sort of balance that and not make it entirely like he was just a human. So, she does a good job, I think, or did a good job of sort of portraying that balance most of the time.
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking about because I think it is possible, it is within the arc, like just the degree to which she was smiling was, I mean, what that sort of shows is like, okay, she's not INTJ then, given the way, because the smile doesn't last as long with INTJ. It's like blink and you miss it. That is something to note. Yeah, and it's like this is the first time, and there was that little scene as well where she said. Also, the actor playing Bobby did a good job in a couple of places comedically. Where
quite a bit at the ending scene because it was like, I knew he was probably eventually going to buckle on the singing thing, but I liked the way that they did that because it got a laugh out of me at least twice, maybe 3 times, as opposed to just being a one-line thing.
And there was a bit where I'll just show it on camera. There was a bit where Eve says, "This is the first time I've made a friend," and he goes like this. First, something like that. How about second?
And it actually also reminded me the fact that we've talked before about Bob Mann basically being an STP type character. And some people, when they have the part at the beginning where they're like, he hasn't taken a vacation in 3 years, they might say, oh, well, that doesn't seem very SP. Aren't they all about having fun? Wouldn't he? But then it reminded me of the scene in Homicide between Kellerman and Pembleton when Kellerman's talking about like doing stuff for fun and like the rush of it and stuff like that. And Pembleton goes, oh, you mean work? Because to Pembleton, like that is what he put, like his particular, thing that he finds fun or what he gets the rush out of actually is something that's part of his job. So
being in the box.
That's the thing with SPs is entirely based on what it is they're into. Yeah. And obviously for Mann, he finds his thrills in his job, so he doesn't want to take a vacation because to him that's just like wasting time.
Yeah, and when Frank did sort of like, there was an episode where he was at home suspended and he drove his wife crazy just trying to use time up.
Yeah.
And didn't know what to do with himself.
He tried to get into a bunch of different things and home and sink himself into that, and he didn't. It wasn't in a way that worked for her. Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of that is like you get these part of cliches of the American detective where they're completely married to their job, they're like and cigarettes and alcohol, and the relationships go to hell.
I mean, there, as they say, stereotypes exist for a reason, and there obviously are plenty of people in that job, and not even necessarily police work, but plenty of jobs that they work long hours and work that kind of thing where they're very wrapped up in intense type things that people are like that. They have a hard time sort of disassociating from that and enjoying like their time off because it's sort of this really is like two different worlds.
He almost what the actor did who played Bobby is he did something that almost broke the fourth wall because there's a certain thing where there's a certain double entendre and then he almost looks like he's looking towards the camera, but he then looks down. So it's like there's some like plausible deniability where it looks as if he was looking at the camera, but not really. At that precise moment where there was something like there was a little bit of a double meaning going on. I think in the scene where it was in Eve's place. Did you notice that bit? Probably not. Did you see that bit?
I don't know. I mean, I saw the scene, but I don't know exactly what you're talking about. So
yeah, there was a bit where he looks almost towards camera as if to look at the audience, like an aside.
I believe you. I just don't specifically remember that.
But the way he did it was he didn't actually look into the camera. He just looked to the side and looked down on the floor and then back. And it's like, why did he just? It's like, and I like that kind of choice where it's like. It just gives a hint of almost breaking the fourth wall, but he didn't do it. So like he got to have his cake and eat it too. So it was a nice little touch. Whereas somebody could easily have gone too far at that point and looked straight down the camera. Yeah, because it was during one of those sections where Eve misunderstands something because she takes something too literally. I wonder if I took this section goes on for a while, with the clother, but But since it's about Eve, it wasn't that one. Right. It was round about here in this scene. Round about here. He said, I thought that was unusual in that there she was quite assertive in like physically dragging him out of her place.
Well, yeah, because Louise was there, so.
Right. I think this was the shot where she says something, there's a little double entendre, and then he looks down. And it's just away from the camera, but it's just that nice little bit of comedy of what he did, where she's a little bit of a double entendre, and he quickly looks to the side towards us, but not directly at us. So, but again, it's this quality. It's hard to see little things like when you're interested in eyes and that. Like, there's not that much, and this is improving it because I've got a sort of a deblockifier on this image viewer. So this, I call it a deblockifier because of the resolution of the image. So you see there, if it goes a little bit blocky, but then it deblocks it, deblockifies it.
Okay.
Well, I can prove it to you by putting it on a different viewer that doesn't have the. Well, anyway, just for the audience, I'll put it on a different one to prove the deblockifier. Right. So this is one without it, and you see when it goes in, you still got the original. It's just to show the low resolution of what I'm working with when I'm interested in eyes and whatnot. Yeah, there's no autoplay on this. Right then. So, oops. I'll get back. Oh, share screen. That one. So one of the things I had is that I was watching this last night and I was a little bit tired when I was watching it, and that's not a good time for me to watch something. But then I was sort of doing other things, but then I sort of recovered, and I enjoyed it more as it went along. It's just that for me, I shouldn't watch stuff late at night because I enjoy it less. Because I'm sort of
in general, I agree. There were some Doctor Who stories that I flat out fell asleep during when I watched them late at night, and then when I saw them when I was more awake, I had a much more appreciation. This I actually waited till today to watch, but that was I went through all the emotional roller coaster yesterday because my my favorite college team, Texas Tech, was in the baseball playoffs, but they were eliminated yesterday. But if they had won yesterday, then they would have been playing again today, and then I would have asked you to do this earlier, and I would have had to been up against the clock. But because that didn't happen, then I was much more relaxed. And so anyway, I still have a lot of stuff to do today, but I didn't have any time. I mean, didn't have any problem finding the time to watch this, but as opposed to watching it back on Tuesday, which is when it actually originally aired, was on a Tuesday night. But anyway,
this is one of the things that Yancy Butler does well in her performance, is the way that she's quite stiff and prim in the way that she walks and carries herself, and even
she keeps that up. Like even when she shows like more of a sort of a relaxed tone, or she's trying to, she still sort of maintains the body part, which I think is good because it shows that there's no anything that she does that's going to be like sort of more loose is just going to be learned behavior because she doesn't have a specific reason to do that. She doesn't need to like relax her muscles or whatever.
So maybe a good compliment for Yancey Buckley would be maybe the makers of Star Trek: The Next Generation, if they saw this, damn, why didn't we cast her instead of Brent Spiner?
It's funny you should say that because I may be wrong, but I'm thinking that she actually eventually was in some Star Trek thing. I can't remember which one though.
It tends to happen because I think it's one of the things where a lot of thespians, they don't want to do science fiction. And so if they do one, they sort of like do other ones.
Well, the funny thing about that is like with Star Trek is you have people that play like various alien races where they're under a lot of makeup and you can't really tell who it is anyway. So to the point where just like Doctor Who did the same thing where they had people playing various different monsters because you can't tell who's who. So they bring back the same guest people to play other monsters. And Star Trek did that somewhat too because they'd have alien races and they'd have some actors come back and play different aliens. But obviously, if they had Yancey Butler on, they probably would not have wanted to bury her in a lot of makeup. So
yeah, quite right. Now, she was only 22 when she did this, so she would have been about 17 in 87. What you said there about getting these show players for Jerry Taylor. I once had a Star Trek Voyager book, and Jerry Taylor was saying that what she actually wanted to play aliens was like classically trained actors and actresses, but she said that she couldn't get them. So it's like they didn't want to do Star Trek. So it's like, so she was sort of stuck with like aliens that are too American, whereas she really wanted someone who was like classically trained in theatre to be able to come up with more of a non-contemporary acting style, something that's more stylized. I mean, there were some good ones, like Peter Jurasik and was on Babylon 5 playing Londo, and he's got a New Jersey accent, I think. Anyway, so I've digressed. So yeah, I think typology-wise, there's a theory that INTP people can act like an ENFP when they're on their territory, sort of like in their wheelhouse at times. And so maybe you got a little bit of that from Eve when she's around her ENFP-ish friend. But yeah, part of that might be like the way she's made up, the way she actually performs the character. She's like giving off a lot of, she gives off ENFP signals, whereas not so much in terms of her word usage or something like that, but in terms of
the E blank FP part, but not necessarily the N.
Yeah, but like from like typical signals that you get from like ENFP, she got some of those.
I think I would disagree with you there. I didn't really get anything that strongly suggested that to me, other than her just being sort of a little bit all over the place. But that doesn't necessarily mean.
Yeah, but I mean, what I sort of meant by the signals was sort of like just the way she played the part.
Oh, I'm pretty sure I know what you meant. I'm just saying I don't entirely agree with you.
Oh, that's fair enough. And it was just sort of my sort of personal like impression of just the way it was acted.
Yeah, I understand. I just think I would say insufficient.
Fair enough.
So maybe not necessarily. I'm not disagreeing like it's impossible. I'm just saying I didn't get the same.
Right.
It wasn't strong enough for me to really feel that way.
Yeah. So my personal opinion is that like the character is a bit blurry on S versus N, but just the way it was performed, it just lent. But again, I was sort of going into sort of stereotypes.
Well, I mean,
ENFP.
I have a slightly different perspective in the fact that I look at it as, could I see myself in those circumstances
Right.
pretty much doing the same things that she did? And the answer is pretty much yes. So that makes it hard for me to rule out my own type.
So maybe so she's possible we could classify her as SFP hipster, because she has got an old-fashioned got an old-fashioned car and an old-fashioned look about her, so she could be a hipster.
Because you'd have to see over a longer period of time and kind of see what,
like there, where she's made up and how she's dressed.
Yeah, it's like, does she, and again, even with that, it's sometimes hard to tell over time because both types can change what they're into. But generally, you're going to start to get an impression as to how they get into things and whether there's any other purpose to it. Because if she's just into different looks and things because it's fun, then that's a different thing,
Yeah. And remembering that section, it's almost like her performance is uneven. It's like she's a different person here than in other scenes. But then you could argue that that's part of the fact that she is a bit theatrical and that she might be amping certain things up. Like the actual character herself might be deciding to act.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that's why I say you can't really tell, because her purpose in most of this episode is simply to combination get the guy off her back, but also avenge her sister. And so she's entirely driven by that. So you don't know. And that first scene may have been a lot of manipulation, just like the stuff with the flowers was. It may have been, especially, she may have even spilled the coffee on Eve and stuff on purpose because she was trying to, she may have thought when she saw there was a female cop that it would be easier to get her to pay attention to her story than if she chose a male cop.
Yeah.
So they don't entirely ever get into why she did any of those things and how much was choices and how much was just coincidence. So you can't really know for sure. But my sort of impression was that herself saying, I don't usually make as much of a spectacle of myself and I'm not getting paid for it. That she wasn't entirely honest when she said that the whole point was she was trying to make a spectacle of herself because she had another purpose in mind that wasn't getting paid.
Yeah, so interesting. Also, the makers of the program are thinking about, we want the audience to be unsure.
Yeah, and
this character.
The thing is, you can say that the in-depth exploration of that aspect of it is she ended up getting what she wanted, but not necessarily for the reason that she thought she would. She picks the female cop, but she picks a female cop that's the least likely to have an emotional connection with her. But because she's trying in general to have or to understand or explore emotional connections, she takes that opportunity to do it with that woman in terms of being, trying to make friends with her and things, and she otherwise might not have. So it's sort of an accidental connection. So whereas Louise may have thought, oh, well, she'll be sympathetic to my situation as a woman, but as it turns out, it's really not because she's a woman. It's because she's an android, or she's trying to understand humans better, and this is an opportunity to do that. So.
Although she did actually like being around Louise as well.
I think
later
so.
on.
After spending time with her, she found it to be like a pleasant way to do that. But at first she wasn't sure, because you can see the look on her face is very much like, I'm not sure how to handle this woman at the beginning, because she doesn't understand the reaction.
Yeah, and also she's been told
the more performance aspects that Louise is doing.
And there's been previous episodes where Bobby has told her, I think even in the first episode, Bobby told her something, and like his instinct was right, hers was wrong, and she decided to sort of leave. And then there was that scene where he sort of like encouraged her to come back. So maybe she did have some doubts because she was wrong in the past about people. And Bobby was the one who was saying you can't trust this woman. And so that's a little bit of growth for the character there, where she sort of went with her own feelings when it came to Louise, and not just going with what Bobby said. With that section about if it walks like a duck, cracks like a duck, it is a duck. It probably is a duck. That was about the roses.
Which also gave me a brief flashback because, of course, we had the previous episode where
yes, the ducks.
Spotting the ducks was part of the way they solved the case.
Right. Yes. So, I think I'll give this about 7 out of 10.
Yeah, I would also give it a 7.
And again, that's because of the effect of the plot on Eve as a device to find out and Eve's react rather than the actual plot.
And I'll take this opportunity to say once again, I think the marketing of this was not very good, because if you went by sort of the preview of the episode, it really doesn't give you a good indication about how things go. It's actually a much more fun episode than the way it's portrayed in the opening, as they kind of, like I said back to the very first episode, they kind of tried to play up certain like weird elements, and it was like they couldn't make up their mind exactly. They were like, it's gonna be weird, but then we've got an attractive chick, and then there's action scenes, and we try to somehow combine these three things, and it's just not very well done. So that's that aspect. Whoever was in charge of coming up with those montages and stuff I don't think that was very good.
Yeah, it's tricky because at that time, I mean, The Simpsons was able to do it, where appealed to, because it was, how do you get different audience groups to watch the same thing and appealing to those?
Simpsons is a lot easier though, and they might not agree with me, but in terms of you have it's a comedy, it's animated, so you appeal to people who like cartoons also, and you also appeal to people that just straight up like comedy, and then you make it well written with characters that explore like real things that people encounter, and you do it in a funny way. So to me, that's a lot easier to market than this is.
Yeah. Also, so when you said that they brought it back and put it in front of Law and Order, so do you get the impression that NBC were giving it a chance, not just burying it?
Well, yeah, what I said before is I think was probably true, is that when they put it on hiatus, they may have been ready to straight up cancel it, and Dick Wolf may have just told them, well, put it next to Law and Order because that's a proven show that I've created, and maybe you'll see the audience will increase, and try to promote them together in some way, even though they're very different shows. But my expectation, even though I have no actual knowledge of it, is that they had enough faith in him and respect for him and wanted to stay on his good side at that time, that they agreed to do that. I don't know specifically that it was his idea, but that, that somehow they, because otherwise I doubt they would have put it in that exact spot where it happened to be right before his other show. So, I know some of the behind the scenes about stuff that happened in Law and Order later, so I can kind of say that it may be that he used up some capital he had at the time that he didn't necessarily have as much of later, because he and the network had some definite disagreements over casting decisions that were made on Law and Order. So they always had sort of an uneasy relationship because he made them plenty of money with his sort of franchise of Law and Order, but they often had clashes over content, and casting.
So was Man and Machine a mid-season replacement that didn't get picked up for another season? or
Yes.
did it straight out get? Oh, right, okay, right.
Yeah, I don't know how many episodes were originally ordered. Usually they do those in like 13 episode deals, but I don't know whether they actually. I don't think they made more, because usually when that's the case, the listings on things like Wikipedia or IMDb will say there was more episodes that just weren't aired, and that eventually they would have when it was shown on like
Yeah.
Sci-Fi Channel and stuff. But there aren't any more that are listed on anything. So my feeling is they only produced those 9. So I don't know whether or not there were more originally ordered and they just halted production, or whether 9 was all they had intended from the beginning. I don't know.
Because I remember with Homicide, which was also a mid-season replacement, they did 9, and then they did another 4.
Right. So that was a 13 episode order. They just decided to hold off the last 4 until the following summer, was the way that went.
Ah, right. Right.
Yeah, basically that was another case where the producers were like, you need to give us another chance. And so they just figured out when they thought they could best schedule that to a way to promote it. And so they decided 2 things: to bring it back in the following summer so that it wasn't competing against new episodes of other things. And they decided to change the order and start with the Robin Williams episode so they could promote his guest starring appearance.
Right. So overall, would you say that? Right. So NBC did give it a chance. It just didn't get. So do you, so. Is there any blame that you could sort of put on NBC? Like things they could have done differently.
Like I said, I don't think it was marketed well, but I think that's pretty common. Is that like the network tries to go for what they think will appeal to the most people, and it doesn't necessarily represent the show very well. So there's probably people that would have watched it if the marketing had been different. But how many more, I don't know. Can't know for sure ever. Also, it would have been, there's definitely consistent research that shows that when you put a new show on, if you mess with the time slot, you put it on different days, you take it off, bring it back, all this stuff. The more you do that, the harder it is to develop the audience, because people don't know when it's on.
Yeah.
So they miss it, especially in those days, because you didn't have the kind of other means of marketing that you have now, or the other like streaming services or things like that, where there's sort of a more organized way to structure something. It was just, either you see the promo that tells you it moved to a different day, or you didn't. And if you didn't see that and you didn't happen to read the TV guide that said, or the TV guide might not even have the update. Sometimes I notice that because it didn't do it soon enough. And so the TV guide says to be announced or some other thing, and people didn't even know it was on.
Yeah, and all of those things work together. And this is something we talked about last time with, I think it was Kappa 2, that those things work against having a strong serial element. Whereas now, where people can like watch box sets, have it streaming, and watch it from the beginning, then you can have much more of a serial element, and the audience won't lose the plot, or they can even rewind to catch certain. So there's a lot more stuff you can put in to sort of reward repeated viewing and audience loyalty of those who have seen previous episodes. Whereas then episodes were a lot more self-contained.
Yeah, and I mean that was obviously the choice that they made from the beginning, that they figure they could get more of an audience doing it that way, probably, or that's just the way they wanted to write the show. I mean, with Law and Order, they were able to do that successfully because it follows a pattern where you're following the same case from start to finish. So it's sort of like the flip side of a show that follows like a period of time, and there happen to be cases within that time. Whereas Law and Order would be like, we're following the case over whatever period of time it took. which I personally prefer the other way, as opposed to Law and Order. But that formula has obviously been very successful in times before. Like, it's the basis of Dragnet, which was probably one of the most successful police procedural shows of all time. And it followed that same kind of, we're following one case from start to finish kind of thing.
So we could sort of say that we've got these components of got these components of Man and Machine, the humor, the cop show, the sci-fi, and the other sci-fi about sort of like Eve's psychology. So do these sort of four aspects, do you think these are like the four aspects of the show for you, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as far as the cop show part of these, so there's different elements to that.
Yeah,
and
action, things like that.
Yeah, and they sort of do play up the action. There's not as much, like, there's details of a case, but they don't really spend a lot of time in figuring out, like, people's motives or that sort of thing. Like, it's more about what takes place in the action side of it than anything else.
Yeah, and also one of the things with the cop show is that this is unusual for a cop show in that, because I was thinking the other day about there were about 9 main characters in Homicide. Like when you in just thinking about the detectives, I think there's about 8 of them, and then you can sort of like put Al Giardello in there as the 9th. But in this, you've got Man and Eve. You got Bobby and Eve, and the woman in the Al Giardello role, the captain. So, or lieutenant. I think Al was lieutenant. So, how do you think that affects things? So that's gonna, you know what I mean? Are most of the cop shows? I know Cagney and Lacey, it was like 2, but were most of the cop shows like have multiple detectives at the time?
I mean, there's a mix. Like I mentioned, Law and Order. Obviously, most of the period of that show, they focused on one duo.
Yeah.
Solving cases as far as the cop end of it, and usually on the lawyer end of it, it was also 2. So that when they do the opening, they always have the scene at the end of the opening where there's the 4 people walking, the 2 main cops and the 2 main lawyers that are featured on the show. Right. So I guess you could say on that it's a 4-person thing, but it's 2 sets of 2.
Where did they do that bit where it's the 2 cops and the 2 lawyers?
Law and Order.
No. Which part in the program?
Well, I mean, every episode, but the opening credits ends with a scene with the 4 main characters walking towards the camera, like in the
Right. Thank you.
So over the years, when they would change cast members, they would just do another one of those with the current cast.
Right.
But even in a so-called ensemble like NYPD Blue, there was still a main duo. The other ones were featured, but it was still always Dennis Franz and whoever his partner was were going to be the most featured.
Right.
And on Homicide, there were people within the network that wanted to do the same thing because they knew how good Andre Braugher was, and that they kind of wanted it to be more about Pembleton and Bayless and not feature as much of the other detectives. And the producers fought with them on that because they didn't want it to be just about 2 detectives. They wanted to keep it a group.
Yeah, because that you'd use the character material up too much if you're doing like 20 episodes a year. Like, I don't want to see 5 seasons of Pembleton and Bayless. Like you'd use up the material.
And Andre Braugher himself was somewhat divided on that because he enjoyed, obviously, when he was featured in episodes, but at the same time, he also enjoyed the ensemble aspect and thought it was more realistic. So he didn't want it to just be about him. even though it might
Oh,
feed his ego and enjoy the scenes, but he didn't think that was as effective in a program sense.
also from an acting point of view, it's a hell of a lot of work, because I remember that they'd be like, if you're the main lead, like it's 16-hour days for something like that.
Yeah. So it was like he enjoyed the occasional time where it was a more intense and lengthy process because he felt like the reward was better. An episode that I enjoyed a lot more than you did, but the Subway episode, he was one of his favorite ones to ever do because of that, because he got to really sort of experience the same thing the character did in terms of have the harrowing long hours in the same place kind of experience where they had a limited shooting schedule. It was hot and cramped and all this, and it was a real subway station. And so everything was very intense. And so as an actor, like, you can enjoy and really get into that performance and feel like, that was really an accomplishment doing that episode. But at the same time, he wouldn't want to do that every week.
Yeah. Yeah. So I suppose when we get to about the 9th episode, we could sort of discuss, why do we think that it didn't take off, Man and Machine? What could they have done differently? Or
yeah, sure, we can do that.
Because I think it's a good series. I'm just trying to think about.
We could even do a separate one, just wrapping it up and talking about that if you wanted to. It's up to you. But
because I'm always sort of interested in what I think are good shows that get cancelled. Why?
Yeah, well, I mean, eventually I got to a point where I stopped watching new shows partly for that reason, because if I got into something, it was just a matter of how long it's going to be before they cancel it. Including, I was just talking about Andre Braugher. There was a show that he was on where I correctly predicted that was exactly what would happen. And so I didn't watch the show on purpose, even though I figured it would be good.
But apparently,
I talked to about it. They said that it was, and they said that they ended it on a cliffhanger because they canceled it and never finished the story.
But apparently, I mean, Jonathan told me that Andre Braugher's now been in something, and he's been in playing that character. I think he's been playing an ISTJ in something. He's done more episodes of that than a Pembleton.
Yeah, that sounds right, because Brooklyn Nine-Nine's been on a while now.
Yeah.
I've never seen it except for clips.
Maybe that's the sort of thing that you could. Maybe what you could do is wait for a series to, like, how many seasons do you want it to do before? Is it all right if a series gets cancelled after 4 seasons, or you're only going to look at a series that's like 6?
There's no specific exact timeline where I'm like, oh, it has to last this long, or if it's well done. There's shows like Everwood was on for 4 seasons, but to me, it's almost like 4 different stories. Each season, because they didn't know whether they were going to be back.
Yeah,
they're almost self-contained within those years. Now there are things that carry over once they knew they were coming back. But even the last episode, they did 2 different versions of the ending because they didn't know whether or not it was going to be the end. And that was one of those things where I have mixed feelings, because I could say, well, on the one hand, I wish it had come back for a 5th season, but the ending was just about perfect. And I've read what the other ending was, and it sounds much cheesier. And so I'm glad that they had the better ending, even if it meant the show had to be canceled.
Yeah, Babylon 5 had that as well, where they actually shot the final episode at the end of the 4th season when they showed it on season 5. So I recommend that for you, Jeff, as an old series from the 90s, about 92 to 98, Babylon 5. There's a series for you. 5 seasons. Right then. So to wrap up, I give it 7, and Jeff gives it 7.
I give it 7 too.
Yeah.
So it is a fun episode.
Yeah.
Spectacular, but good.
A good one for character development for Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And so it probably occurred at about the right point in the season. I think episode 5. So I'll just stop it now.